Wyoming Territory, June 1873. The wind cut sharp across the open plains as the wagon train rolled slow through alkali dust and sagebrush. Odessa North stood 20 paces from the last wagon, skirts tugged by the breeze, arms crossed tight over her chest. Behind her, the wagon master's voice cracked like dry wood. "You're no longer part of this train. You lied, and we don't take kindly to liars." Odessa didn't argue. Not anymore. She had begged when the rumors started, pleaded when they asked about the child. But the truth didn't matter to people already set against her. The boy hadn't been hers, though she had nursed him through the fever when his mother died and held him until he passed, too weak to cry. That had been enough for tongues to wag, to say she was hiding something, that she brought bad luck. And now she was alone. The wagons moved on without her, wheels creaking, children peeking around canvas flaps. No one met her eyes. She had nothing but a water skin, a small satchel of dried beans and hardtack, and the clothes on her back. She walked east until the ruts faded. Then she just walked. By the second day, her lips cracked and her feet bled. She kept walking. By the third day, she collapsed under a cottonwood tree near a shallow creek, not even able to lift her head for a drink. That was how he found her. Zeke Zamora reined in his gelding when he spotted the shape near the water. Tall, lean, dust in his beard and sun in his eyes, he dismounted in one fluid motion, rifle unslung and ready just in case. But when he dropped to one knee beside her, the rifle forgot its purpose. She was barely breathing. Face burned from sun. Hands scraped. Her lips moved without sound. "Hey," he said roughly, tipping water into her mouth in slow drops. "Easy now. Just drink." Her eyes fluttered. Gray-blue, like high clouds before rain. He carried her to his camp and stayed up that night feeding her broth, keeping the fire low, checking her pulse like he had learned nursing his dying brother years ago. She woke briefly once, coughed, and whispered, "Where?" "Safe," Zeke said, voice low. "You're safe now." She passed out again. By dawn, color had returned to her cheeks. When she finally sat up 2 mornings later, she looked around the camp bedroll, fire pit, tin cups, lasso coiled near his saddle, and then looked at him. "You saved me." Zeke shrugged, poking at the fire. "Found you by the creek. You were half gone." "I thought I was," she said softly, then cleared her throat. "Thank you." He met her gaze, quiet and steady. "What happened?" She looked down at her hands. "They exiled me. From the wagon train." Zeke lifted an eyebrow, waiting. "They said I lied. About a child not being mine." Her voice cracked. "He died. I tried to help, but when his fever took him, they blamed me. Said I brought death." Zeke didn't speak for a long moment. Then he stood. "You hungry?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. He handed her a tin plate. Beans and cornbread. The first warm food she had tasted in days. They sat across from each other, quiet but not uncomfortable. Fire between them, wind in the trees above. "Name's Zeke Zamora," he said, offering his hand. She took it. "Odessa North." He held her hand a moment longer than necessary. Then he let go. Over the next few days, she regained her strength. He taught her how to ride his spare horse, how to handle a rifle just in case, how to spot wild onions and avoid rattlers. She listened closely, asked questions. Her voice grew stronger. Her eyes steadier. "You always live out here alone?" she asked one night, watching him mend a saddle strap. "Most times." He glanced up. "Had a brother. He died in the war. After that I stuck to cattle work, trapping, whatever paid." "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded once. "You." "My parents died in Missouri. Fever. I joined the wagon train alone. Figured the West might be different." She gave a hollow laugh. "I was wrong." Zeke looked up, his gaze sharp. "You were just with the wrong people." Their eyes held. 3 days later, they came across a burned-out homestead. Smoke still clung to the air. A girl's scream rang out from inside the barn. Zeke charged in without hesitation, rifle drawn. Odessa followed him. They found her maybe 6 years old, curled behind a stack of barrels. Her dress was torn, her face streaked with soot. Zeke knelt. "Hey there. It's all right. We're here to help." The girl threw herself into Odessa's arms. Her name was Orla. Her parents had been killed 2 days prior by a gang of drifters who stole whatever they could carry and burned the rest. She has no one, Odessa said later as the girl clung to her side. Zeke looked at her, then at the child. Then she has us. Odessa blinked, surprised. You mean that? I do. They rode west together, the three of them. Zeke had a small cabin near the base of the Wind River Range. He had not been there in months, but the thought of it now of building something steady there felt less like a burden and more like a hope. That night, Odessa sat beside him on a log while Orla slept wrapped in a blanket nearby. You could have left me, she said quietly. By the creek. I never would have. She looked at him. Why? Zeke turned toward her. Because something in me knew you were mine to find. Her breath caught. He reached out, brushing a knuckle against her cheek. And now I do not plan to lose you. Odessa leaned in, heart pounding, and kissed him. It was not rushed. It was not careful. It was real. By the time they pulled apart, Zeke's hand was cradling her jaw, and Odessa's eyes were brimming with something that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with being seen. Stay with me, he said. She nodded, voice thick. I already have. And there, in the wild quiet of Wyoming, something solid began. The cabin leaned into the slope of a narrow valley, where pine shadows stretched long across the clearing by late afternoon. Zeke hadn't seen it in near a year, and the place wore its neglect plainly, shingles curled, door sagging, brush grown high around the fence posts. But the walls still stood and the chimney hadn't crumbled with the snow. That was enough to begin. Odessa stepped inside first, Orla's small hand tucked into hers. The air smelled of dust and old wood and the floor creaked in protest under her boots. She walked slow, eyes adjusting to the dim. A quilt was folded on the cot in the corner, a cracked window let in a sliver of clean light, and the rough-hewn table still bore the burn ring of a lantern long gone cold. Zeke dropped the saddlebags near the hearth and set to clearing what he could without speaking. Odessa opened the window and let the air shift. Orla wandered between them, quiet but watchful. You built this? Odessa asked, brushing cobwebs from the shelf above the stove. My brother helped. We built it the winter before he joined up, Zeke said, his voice even. Didn't get to live in it long? Odessa didn't offer condolences. She just nodded and opened the back door wide to let the last of the light spill in. That night, they didn't speak much. Orla fell asleep curled up in a nest of blankets, and Odessa sat by the fire, sewing a tear in her sleeve by lamplight. Zeke whittled at a block of juniper, his hands moving without urgency. You ever plan on settling? She asked eventually, her needle pausing mid-stitch. He looked up, considering. Didn't think I would. Never saw the point without someone to settle with. Her eyes didn't leave his. You see it now? He nodded once, slow and certain. The next morning brought work. Zeke repaired the barn roof while Odessa dragged water from the well and cleared the ash from the cookstove. Orla gathered pine cones in her apron and stacked them by the hearth like treasure. By the third day, the cabin began to feel less like a place borrowed from memory and more like something new being shaped between them. Zeke rode out before sunrise with his rifle slung across his back, returning at dusk with a sack of flour, a bag of nails, and a tin of molasses from a small trading post 20 miles west. He handed the goods to Odessa without ceremony but lingered when she touched his wrist in thanks. You get any trouble? She asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Couple of ranch boys asked after the girl, he said, glancing toward the door. Said they saw smoke at the homestead. Asked if I'd found anything. Her mouth tightened. And you said that she wasn't theirs to ask about. He met her gaze. Nobody's taking her. Odessa exhaled slowly. Good. Later, after Orla was asleep, Zeke carved out a square of cedar and began sanding it smooth. Odessa leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the firelight play along the edge of his jaw. You always this steady? She asked. He didn't look up. Not always. What changed? I stopped running from the quiet. She stepped closer. You think I could learn that? He set the cedar down and turned to her. You already are. She took his hand and led him outside where the stars hung thick and low above the trees. The air smelled of pine needles and distant rain. She stood close enough to feel the heat of his body, her voice low. I've spent most of my life trying to prove I belong somewhere. You don't need to prove anything to me, he said. I want to build something that lasts. His hand found the small of her back, grounding. Then we'll build it here. Their lips met again, not with urgency, but with the quiet certainty of two people who had already chosen. There were no promises spoken that night, no grand declarations. Just the soft hush of wind through the grass, and the steady beat of two hearts learning the rhythm of a shared life. Inside, Orla stirred in her sleep, then rolled toward the warmth of the fire. In the dark outside, Odessa pressed her cheek to Zeke's shoulder and closed her eyes. For the first time in a very long while, she felt claimed not by judgment, not by need, but by something far gentler. She didn't say it aloud. She didn't have to. She was already home. The valley warmed slow as July settled in, golden light stretching long across the timberline by evening. The cabin had taken on a rhythm: quiet mornings, steady work, shared meals, and in its heart, a sense of belonging none of them named aloud. Zeke drove fence posts into the far field, sweat darkening the back of his shirt, while Odessa taught Orla to grind flour with a stone bowl and pestle found in the root cellar. The child's laugh, seldom heard in the early days, now rang out like a small bell in the stillness. One afternoon, while Zeke saddled the mare for a trip to the high pasture, Odessa stepped out of the cabin holding a folded scrap of paper. "This came from the post rider," she said, handing it to him. He wiped his hands on his trousers and took it. "Didn't know anyone knew we were here." "They didn't." "It's addressed to you." His name was scrawled across the front in an uneven hand. He opened it slowly, eyes scanning the words, jaw tightening. "Bad news?" she asked, watching the color shift in his face. "Old trail partner of mine, Tom Laramie. He's dying. Consumption by the sound of it. Wants to see me before it takes him." Odessa stepped closer. "Where is he?" "Near Laramie. Might take 4 days' ride, 5 with the rivers high." She looked toward the cabin where Orla sat stringing berries on a length of twine. "You should go." He hesitated, folding the letter. "I don't like leaving you both here alone. We'll be all right. The rifle's loaded. Food's stored up. I'll keep the dog near." He studied her face, then nodded once. "I'll leave at first light." That night, she sat on the porch while he packed. The fireflies danced low in the grass, and the moon rose fat and pale behind the ridge. When he came to sit beside her, she didn't speak at first. "You trust me to watch over her," she said finally, her voice low. "I do. Even if something happens?" His hand found hers in the dark. "I trust you with both our lives." She turned her face toward him. "I never expected to be trusted again. Not after what they did." "You were never the one who needed proving," he said. "They just didn't see clearly." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat like that until the fireflies went still and the night turned cool. He rode out at dawn with a bedroll tied tight and a tin of coffee in his saddlebag. Odessa stood in the doorway with Orla beside her, one hand shading her eyes. He looked back only once, lifting 2 fingers in a quiet farewell. The days after passed slow and full. Odessa chopped wood in the mornings, taught Orla to thread a needle in the afternoons. When the rain came sudden on the 3rd day, they moved bowls beneath the leaks and laughed as they tried to catch the drips. But by the 5th night, Odessa woke with her heart pounding. There had been a sound outside. Not wind. Not rain. She rose without lighting the lamp and took the rifle from its place behind the door. Orla stirred in her sleep but didn't wake. Outside, the moon lit the clearing in pale silver. The pines stood still. She waited, breath shallow, listening. Then movement. A branch snapping, low to the ground. She stepped off the porch barefoot, rifle raised. "Who's there?" she called, voice steady. A figure stepped into view, thin and ragged, hands raised. "Please," the woman rasped. "I'm not here to steal. Just food." Odessa didn't lower the rifle. "Where do you come from?" "Up from the river. Lost my husband to fever last spring. Been walking since." Odessa studied her. The woman couldn't have been more than 30, though her face was hollow with hunger. "I've got a child inside," Odessa said. "If you mean trouble, turn around now." "I don't. I swear it." Then come to the porch slow. She gave the woman a blanket, a cup of water, and a corner of cornbread. They sat without speaking until the sun edged the horizon. By morning, the woman was gone, leaving only the folded blanket on the step and a sprig of wild mint tucked beneath it. Zeke returned at dusk 2 days later, his horse mud-slicked and tired. Odessa met him in the clearing, relief flooding her quiet features. He held on, Zeke said as he dismounted. Barely. But I got to him in time. She took the reins, walking beside him toward the barn. Did he say anything worth carrying back? Zeke's mouth twitched, something close to a smile deepening the lines near his eyes. Said I looked no different than I had 10 years ago. Then he laughed until he coughed himself to sleep. Inside the cabin, Orla rushed to wrap her arms around his waist. He crouched to hug her. You keep the place safe while I was gone? We shot a coyote, she said proudly. Well, Miss Odessa did. Zeke looked up at Odessa, one brow raised. That right. She gave a small shrug. It stayed away after. That night, after Orla was asleep, Zeke sat on the porch sharpening his knife, Odessa beside him with her mending in her lap. You think about what comes next? She asked, not looking up. I have. And? I want to marry you. She drew in a breath, slow and even. You sure? I wouldn't ask if I weren't. She laid the mending aside. Then I'll say yes. Zeke reached for her hand, callous fingers closing around hers. We'll do it proper. I'll ride into town next week, get the license. All right. They didn't kiss then. They just sat hand in hand, the air soft around them, their breaths falling into the same rhythm. And from inside the cabin, the quiet sound of Orla's dreaming told them they were no longer just two people building a life. They were already a family. The wedding was held beneath the cottonwoods where the creek curved gentle behind the cabin and wild columbine bloomed pale along the banks. Zeke wore his cleanest shirt, sleeves rolled, collar stiff from scrubbing. Odessa had sewn a dress from muslin traded weeks earlier, nothing fine, but it fit her well and caught the breeze like it belonged to the land. Orla held a bundle of sage tied with ribbon, her hair braided down her back. The preacher came on horseback from a ranch settlement to the south, a quiet man with weathered skin and a voice that didn't rise for ceremony. He said the words plain, and when he asked if they would stand together in hardship and in peace, they both answered without hesitation. Afterward, they shared a meal of roast quail and flatbread cooked over coals, and Odessa offered a jar of preserved apples she'd been saving since spring. Orla fell asleep in the grass before the sun dipped behind the ridge. When the preacher rode out, Zeke walked a stretch with him, then returned to find Odessa sitting with her boots off, feet in the creek. You all right? He asked, stepping over a root to reach her. She nodded. Just letting my bones remember what stillness feels like. He sat beside her, their knees brushing. You didn't say much during the vows. I've already said everything worth saying, she replied, voice soft. Now I get to live it. Zeke leaned back on his elbows, eyes on the sky. The preacher gave me a tin box before he left. Said it was from the woman you fed, the one who came through. What's in it? He reached into his vest pocket and held it out. Inside was a carved button of turquoise and bone, wrapped in cloth. Odessa turned it over in her fingers, struck quiet. She said it belonged to her mother, Zeke added. Called it a truth token. Gave it to folks who saw her without shame. Odessa folded the cloth again, slow and careful. Then I'll carry it. Zeke reached for her hand. You've carried worse. She looked at him, eyes steady. And I've laid it down. The next morning, they cleared the cabin of what they didn't need: extra tools, broken hinges, a cracked lantern, and loaded a cart for the settlement. Zeke traded the scrap for seed grain and a single milk goat, which Orla promptly named Maple. Odessa began planting while the last frost still lingered in the deep shade. Zeke tilled with a mule team borrowed from a neighbor 3 ridges west. In town, word trickled in that the wagon train had reached Idaho. Odessa said nothing of it when she overheard 2 riders mention it at the trading post. But that night, as she shelled peas by lantern light, her hands moved slower than usual. Zeke noticed. You all right? She nodded, then set the bowl aside. I heard someone say they made it. He didn't ask who. She leaned back in the chair, legs tucked beneath her. I don't wish them harm, but I wish they'd seen me clearer. Zeke set his knife down. They didn't deserve to. That's different. She met his gaze. It is. He rose, crossed the room, and pressed a kiss to her temple. You're here. You're mine. That's what I see. Outside, a coyote called from the ridge. Odessa rested her head against his chest and closed her eyes. By late August, the garden came up in uneven rows, carrots stunted, beans tangled, but Odessa grinned when she pulled the first red tomato from the vine. Orla chased chickens through the yard, laughing breathless, her hair coming loose in the wind. Zeke built a table from pine planks and carved their initials beneath the edge. He didn't show her, but one evening while sweeping, Odessa found it and ran her hand across the letters, smiling to herself. They began to receive visitors: a trader passing through, a widow with 2 sons seeking work, a Paiute woman from the northern edge of the valley trading cured salmon for cloth. Odessa offered coffee, Zeke offered fence repairs, and the cabin slowly became a place people stopped by instead of passed over. One evening, Orla asked if she could call them Mama and Papa. Odessa blinked, then crouched to meet her eyes. You sure? Orla nodded, solemn. You're mine now. Zeke lifted her onto his shoulders and carried her through the tall grass until the stars came out. That night, Odessa sat by the window, needle in hand, as Zeke cleaned his boots by lamplight. You ever think you'd end up here? She asked. He shook his head. Didn't think I'd end up anywhere. And now, he looked at her. Now I want to build a porch on the south side. Shade in summer. She smiled. That's a good place to start. They didn't speak more that night. They didn't need to. The wind moved through the trees, the fire burned low, and the quiet between them was not emptiness but a peace they'd both earned. Stitch by stitch, step by step. The first frost came in the last week of September, silvering the fields before sunrise and drawing breath from the animals in quiet clouds. Odessa had pulled her heavier shawl from the chest and started closing the shutters each night. Zeke had reinforced the stovepipe and begun stacking firewood in a lean-to he'd built against the barn. That morning, Odessa rose before light. She moved quietly around the hearth, coaxing the embers to life, careful not to wake the child still curled beneath her quilt. She poured water into the kettle, then stood at the window, watching the frost melt in slow streaks across the glass. Zeke stepped in from outside, boots damp, coat dusted with cold. Cows showing signs, he said, pulling off his gloves. Could be any day now? She holding steady? He nodded, rubbing warmth back into his hands. I'll sleep in the barn tonight. Keep watch. Odessa turned from the window. I'll bring you supper there, then. He stepped closer, the early light catching in the lines at the corner of his eyes. You don't have to. I want to. He didn't answer, only reached for her hand and kissed her knuckles. Rough fingers brushing her wrist. No more needed saying. Later, while Orla painted her pinecone animals with a bit of leftover whitewash, Odessa stitched a lining into the baby's blanket, a soft flannel piece she'd bartered from the widow 2 ridges west. She didn't speak of it aloud, not yet, but her hands worked with quiet certainty. That evening, she packed a tin of stew, a square of molasses cake, and one of Orla's painted pine cones wrapped carefully in cloth. She walked the path to the barn with the lantern swinging low, boots crunching on the brittle grass. Zeke was already inside, bedded down on hay beside the cow, who shifted uncomfortably but showed no signs of distress. Odessa handed him the bundle, then sat beside him on the floor without invitation. They ate in silence, the barn warm with the smell of animals and oil and old wood. I think she'll hold through tonight, he said, setting the tin aside. Odessa leaned back against the stall wall. You ever imagined this before? A barn like this? A child? A woman bringing you supper? Zeke looked over at her. I used to think I'd never want it. Thought I couldn't carry another loss. You're not alone in that. He nodded. But I was wrong. The cow shifted again, let out a low sound. Zeke stood, checked her, then came back to sit beside Odessa. I've been thinking, he said finally. We could add a second room before winter's deep. Give Orla her own space. And space for the next one. Odessa's breath caught, but she didn't look away. You know, I saw the signs. You've been tired earlier. Careful with the axe. That look you get when stew turns your stomach. She rested her head against his shoulder. I was waiting to be sure. I didn't want to say it too soon. He placed his hand gently over hers. You're sure now? I am. He pulled her close, his breath warm against her hair. Then we'll make room. For all of it. The cow calved just before dawn. A healthy heifer, legs long, eyes bright. Zeke wiped her clean with old cloth, Odessa steadying the mother's head when she grew restless. Orla stayed asleep in the cabin, unaware of the night's new life. By the time the sun rose, the barn was quiet again. That Sunday, after Odessa had washed the linens and Orla had practiced her letters at the table, Zeke took out the cedar box where they kept the marriage license and the deed. He added a folded paper with Orla's full name, written in his hand, and beneath it, a line declaring her their daughter in all but blood. We don't need a judge, he said when Odessa looked at him. But I want it written. She signed it beside him without a word. Then she took the pine cone animal Orla had given her and placed it next to the folded papers. That night, Odessa lit the oil lamp and read from the small book of Psalms she kept by the bed, her voice low, steady. Zeke leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, not interrupting. When she finished, she closed the book and looked up. I've stopped waiting for the other shoe to fall, she said. Zeke stepped forward. Because you trust what we've built? She nodded. Because I trust you. He took her face in both hands, kissed her slow and sure. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. We've made something real, Dessa. And I'll keep it safe. By November, the second room was framed, the roof sealed tight. The valley had turned gold and fire red, and the nights grew still with cold. Orla learned to knit, her small fingers clumsy but determined. Zeke carved a cradle from pine, smoothing the edges with patience that surprised them both. Odessa began humming when she moved through the house, a habit she hadn't had before. Zeke never mentioned it, only listened. One night, just before the first snow, they lay together in the quiet of their room. Orla slept soundly in her new bed beside the stove, and the fire burned low. We never did have a proper honeymoon, Odessa said, her fingers tracing the edge of the quilt between them. Zeke chuckled, low in his chest. What would that look like for us? She smiled. A day with no chores. Just us. And time. I could give you that. Come spring, we'll ride out to the lake past the ridge. Pack a meal. Let Orla stay with the widow's boys. Odessa closed her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. That sounds like forever. He kissed her shoulder. It will be. Outside, the snow began to fall, soft and slow, covering the ground in silence. Inside, the cabin was warm, the walls lined with the life they'd made. A child asleep. A cradle waiting. Two people who had reached for each other once in desperation and found not survival, but something deeper. They lay together, hands clasped beneath the quilt, and did not wake until the sun rose over their first winter as a family. Years later, when Orla was grown and the youngest boy was old enough to ride, Zeke and Odessa sat on the porch they'd built together, watching the light shift through the pines. You think we've done enough? She asked. Zeke looked out at the land, the barn, the garden, the laughter drifting from inside. I think we've done everything that matters. And beside him, Odessa smiled. A smile born not of ease, but of everything they had come through to reach this quiet, golden place. Together. Always.